Hello folks, what follows is a reading from Jordan Peterson's new book, Beyond Order. I highly recommend it. I myself bought it on Kindle and Audible, and I'm half reading and half listening to it. So I'll listen to it when I train in the morning, and then it catches up automatically on the Kindle to where you've listened to it to. And then I'm reading it at night before sleep. It's a great book. I haven't finished it yet, I'm only halfway through, but there's a particular piece on Horus, Osiris, Set and Isis that I really wanted to relay to you because I think it's very relevant to the themes that I've been covering on this channel up until this point. So I'm going to give you a reading from his book, then I'm going to give you some interpretations from Jung, Crowley and even Crowley, and then I'm going to, at the end of the video, I'll leave you with about, I think it's a 10-minute clip of Jordan Peterson from a lecture in 2016 talking about Horus and Osiris, and that will be this video. I hope you enjoy it. Cheers. Rescue your father, Osiris and Horus. Consider the ancient Egyptian story of Osiris, Set, Isis and Horus. The Egyptians regarded Osiris as the founding deity of the state. You can profitably consider him to be an amalgam of all the personality characteristics of all the people who established the astonishing civilization on the Nile River. Osiris was worshipped as the culture-establishing hero, whose world-creating exploits as a young, vibrant god produced one of the first great and enduring civilizations. But he aged, as all things do, and became willfully blind. The Egyptians insisted that this crucially important figure in their mythology possessed both of these attributes, and that insistence constituted a great truth. The great founder god became anachronistic, but more importantly, he began to close his eyes when he knew full well he should have kept them open. Osiris stopped paying attention to how his kingdom was being run. That was willful blindness, and there is no blaming that on mere age. It is a terrible temptation, as it allows for the sequestration into the future, the trouble we could face today. That would be fine if trouble did not compound like interest, but we all know that it does. Osiris's decision to close his eyes when he should have kept them open exacted a brutally heavy price. Subjugation to his evil brother, Set. The idea that the state had a malevolent brother was an axiom, we might say, of the Egyptian worldview. No doubt the consequences of a complex, long-standing civilization observing its own flaws, and something that has retained its relevance to the current day. Once a properly functional hierarchy has been established, an opportunity opens for its positions of authority to be usurped, not by people who have the competence demanded by the task at hand, but by those willing to use manipulation, deceit, and compulsion to gain status and control. It was all those counterproductive forces that the Egyptians were attempting to conceptualize in the figure of Set, the enemy of illumination, enlightenment, vision, and consciousness. It was Set's greatest ambition to rule Egypt, to take the place of the rightful pharaoh. By turning a blind eye to his evil brother's machinations, by refusing to see, Osiris allowed Set to gain strength. This proved fatal, or as fatal as an error can be, to an immortal. Set bided his time until he caught Osiris in a moment of weakness. Then he dismembered him and scattered the pieces over the Egyptian countryside. It is not possible to finally kill Osiris, the eternal human impulse towards social organization. That is a force that will not die, but it is possible to break him into pieces to make it difficult for him to get his act together. And that is exactly what Set managed. Osiris, god of order, falls apart. This happens all the time in people's individual lives and equally in the history of families, cities, and states. Things fall apart when love affairs collapse, careers deteriorate, or cherished dreams die. When despair, anxiety, uncertainty, and hopelessness manifest themselves in the place of habitable order, and when nihilism and the abyss make their dread appearance, destroying the desirable and stable values of current life. Under such circumstances, chaos emerges, and that is why the goddess Isis queen of the underworld and consort of Osiris, makes her appearance when Osiris is destroyed by Set. Isis scours the countryside, searching for the vital essence of Osiris. She finds it in the form of his dismembered phallus, vessel of the seminal idea, the spermatic word, the fructifying principle, and makes herself pregnant. What does this mean? The queen of the underworld, the goddess of chaos, is also the force that eternally renews. All the potential constrained by the previous system of apprehension, of category, of assumption, all the invisible limitation imposed upon the inhabitants of that orderly state is released. For better and worse, when the system breaks into pieces. Thus, when the center will no longer hold, even at the darkest hour, new possibility makes itself manifest. It is for this reason that the archetypal hero is born when things are at their worst. The now pregnant Isis returns to her home in the underworld and gives birth in due time to Horus, rightful son of the long-lost king, alienated as he matures from his now corrupted kingdom, something we all experience during our maturation. His primary attribute is the eye, the famous Egyptian single eye, while his avatar is the falcon, a bird that takes precise aim at its prey, strikes the target with deadly accuracy, and possesses an acuity of vision unparalleled in the kingdom of living things. More importantly, however, Horus has the will to see, along with the ability. This is courage itself, the refusal to shrink from what makes itself known, no matter how terrible it seems. Horus is the great god of attention, and the Egyptians determined, in their strange narrative manner, in a form of imaginative thinking that stretched over thousands of years, that the faculty of attention should rule over all others. Horus differs from Osiris, his father, in his willingness to see. He sees his uncle Set, for example, precisely for what he is. Set is pure malevolence, evil itself. Nonetheless, upon his maturity, Horus returns to the kingdom usurped from his father and confronts his uncle. They engage in an epic battle. The young god and rightful heir to the throne sees the opportunity lurking where responsibility has been abdicated and is unwilling to look away. This is no feat for the faint of heart, not when it is taken all the way to its logical conclusion. Not when the corruption and the willful blindness is exposed all the way to the bottom. To look upon evil with eyes unshielded is dangerous beyond belief, regardless of how necessary it is to look. During the confrontation, Set tears out one of his courageous nephew's eyes. Despite the damage he sustains, Horus emerges victorious. It is of vital importance to reiterate, in light of this victory, the fact that he enters the battle voluntarily. It is a maxim of clinical intervention, a consequence of observation of improvement in mental health across many schools of practical psychological thought, that voluntary confrontation with a feared, hated, or despised obstacle is curative. We become stronger by voluntarily facing what impedes our necessary progress. This does not mean bite off more than you can chew, any more than voluntarily enter battle means seek conflict carelessly. We are well advised to take on challenges at precisely the rate that engages and compels alertness, and forces the development of courage, skill, and talent, and to avoid foolhardy confrontation with that which lies beyond current comprehension. How is it possible to gauge the rate at which challenges should be sought? It is the instinct for meaning, something far deeper and older than mere thought, that holds the answer. Does what you are attempting compel you forward without being too frightening? Does it grip your interest without crushing you? Does it eliminate the burden of time passing? Does it serve those you love and perhaps even bring some good to your enemies? That is responsibility. Constrain evil, reduce suffering, confront the possibility that manifests in front of you every second of your life with the desire to make things better, regardless of the burden you bear, regardless of life's often apparently arbitrary unfairness and cruelty. All other approaches merely deepen the pit, increase its heat, and doom those who inhabit it to continual worsening of their already serious problems. Everyone knows it. Everyone's conscience proclaims it. Everyone's true friend or loved one observes it and despairs when they see someone for whom they care failing to do what needs to be done. Horus takes his eye back from the defeated Set and banishes him beyond the borders of the kingdom. There is no killing Set. He is eternal as Osiris, eternal as Isis and Horus. The evil that threatens at all levels of experience is something or someone that everyone has to contend with always, psychologically and socially. But for a time, evil can be overcome, banished and defeated. Then peace and harmony can prevail for as long as people do not forget what brought them both about. Horus recovers his eye. A sensible person in such a situation would thank his lucky stars, place his eye back into its empty socket and get on with his life. But that is not what Horus does. He returns instead to the underworld, to the belly of the beast, to the kingdom of the dead, where he knows he will find the spirit of Osiris. Dismembered though he may be, near death, even dead in a sense, Osiris inhabits the underworld domain of chaos itself. That is the dead father in the belly of the beast. Horus finds the once great king and grants to him the eye torn out by Set. Once again, because of the sacrifice and vision of his son, the Ancient of Days can see. Horus then takes his father, vision restored, and returns with him to the kingdom so they can rule in tandem. The Egyptians insisted that it was this combination of vision, courage, and regenerated tradition that constituted the proper sovereign of the kingdom. It was this juxtaposition of wisdom and youth that comprised the essence of the power of the pharaoh, his immortal soul, the source of his authority. When you face a challenge, you grapple with the world and inform yourself. This makes you more than you are. It makes you increasingly into who you could be. Who could you be? You could be all that a man or a woman might be. You could be the newest avatar in your own unique manner of the great ancestral heroes of the past. What is the upper limit to that? We do not know. Our religious structures hint at it. What would a human being who's completely turned on, so to speak, be like? How would someone who determined to take full responsibility for the tragedy and malevolence of the world manifest himself? The ultimate question of man is not who we are, but who we could be. So within this myth, we have some interesting points, one of which I think is about death and rebirth. And then, as other people have, many other people have said, it's a myth of death and rebirth. And it's also about the hermetic and alchemical principles of dissolution and resolution. And therefore, integration. The human psychology at the micro level splits. It has to. I mean, you have to do different things for different people at different times and different contexts. And then over time, as we become less and less authentic, as we work our way towards adulthood, away from childhood, you simply can't just afford to be authentic. In fact, you could say that the transition from adolescence to adulthood is a series of learnt artifices that allow you to function in the civilized world, within a social group context. At the cost of your authenticity, of your connection with your unconscious self, and at the cost of yourself, quite frankly. You have to give yourself up. You have to sacrifice yourself and, in a sense, plunge it into the underworld in pieces. Is the underworld here possibly, is it worth exploring the idea that it's a representation of the Jungian unconscious, which would create our shadow? Does Osiris, is that all of the parts that have been torn to pieces by Set? Is that our unclaimed potential and our unclaimed rage and our unclaimed disavowed resentment and our aggression and assertiveness and everything that is unclaimed that's gone into the shadow. This is an interesting thing to look at. That would mean, in this context, that Isis was the, we could say, the spirit of anima that reclaims and revives the dead self. So only the yin, the feminine in us, only anima. It's not animus that revives. It's not the mind that revives. It's the soul that revives and brings us back together. How does anima do that? She reclaims the sword of animus. As Jung said, when animus meets anima, when male meets female, when animus meets anima, animus draws his sword of power. When anima meets animus, when female meets male, and they perceive each other, of course, as threat because they lead. When a man meets a woman or a woman meets a man, they are attracted to each other, but they recognize at the unconscious level, that's the source of their dissolution. They'll be dissolved in that wonderful thing that they find so appealing. So they respond defensively. Animus pulls his sword out. Thank you, Dr. Freud. And anima, she, according to Jung, and I'm paraphrasing, I didn't pull the quote up, squirts her a poison cloud of illusion. So there's this squid-like response to the threat, which is to cloud the environment with illusion. So you have this anima-animus balance, integration, polarity, and here we have anima is saving animus with his sword. So she picks up the sword, the phallus, well, literally the penis of the corpse, and impregnates herself with this thing. We could also say there are elements here to the Gnostic story of Sophia. So once that's happened, a revival can occur, a sort of a new consciousness is born. What's the best way of reflecting a new consciousness? Well, if you want to reflect consciousness itself, you do it through the major lens through which humanity observes, which is the eye. And I think it's of great significance that the young God, the new God, is represented as a falcon. He who has the all-seeing eye. He's got the best position to see everything. He is new vision. He is novelty. He then has to go down into the underworld. He doesn't abandon Osiris. He doesn't say, well, that Aeon is over. It's now my time. He goes and rescues him, and he brings the eye that he's lost in order to do that. He shows him the new vision. I'm reminded of Seth, Darth. There's a linguistic ambiguity there between Seth and Darth Vader. Seth, Darth Vader.
Your powers are weak, old man.
You can't win, Darth. If you strike me down, I shall become more powerful than you can possibly imagine.
Osiris is killed by Set, and it is observed by Horus, who is Luke. He is the Sky Walker. He is the one who sees from the sky everything that there is to be seen. Osiris never really comes back physically. In the Star Wars story, Osiris, Obi-Wan, comes back as a Jedi spirit to offer support and guidance and to represent kind of morality and virtue and the spirit of being an upstanding Jedi Knight. Notice their phallic sabers as they go about their business. Here is a short piece that I pulled out from Embodying Osiris, which is a book by Mr. Cavalli, Tom Cavalli. Here it is. Jung studied alchemy and its psychology for the last 30 years of his life. He mostly concentrated on medieval alchemy, but was also well aware of the importance of Osiris to the symbolism of death and rebirth. Jung was convinced that alchemy's real worth had less to do with recipes for transmuting metals than with demonstrating psychophysical methods of transforming consciousness. Parentheses, this is me, the editor, speaking now. That is the mainstream interpretation of alchemy. I thought for years that it was symbolic. It was never... Alchemists who walk around medieval Europe didn't think that they were transmuting lead to gold. It was code. That was always code. They knew that they were about a spiritual and psychological practice. Back to Mr. Cavalli. The true intent of the alchemist, he believed, was to extend life and deepen the capacities of the human mind. Alchemy was not meant to replace nature, but instead to facilitate its processes so that the time needed to transform gross matter into something exquisitely refined was markedly shortened. We might conjecture that instead of having to live many lifetimes, a person could accomplish the goal of individuation in a single lifetime by applying alchemical methods. And here there is great crossover with Jordan Peterson's point. And what precisely is this goal? In my view, the goal is the creation of a divine self, one that enjoys the conscious union of ego and self, instincts and archetypes, femininity and masculinity, psyche and soma, the body, the spirit, the mind, and the body, having an active relationship with the unconscious, mastering the technique of active imagination, integrating shadow, recognizing projections, and finally achieving object love with individuals, the collective, nature, and God. I haven't read Embodying Osiris yet. I just got that because I wanted to pull that particular quote out. I've not read the whole thing. But so far, so good. It looks like another book that's worth reading. It's very, very well reviewed as well. Final point from reading tarot cards. I never owned the deck, but I owned the book that interpreted them because I used to really like Aleister Crowley. There was a book of his called Magic Without Tears, which is a series of letters between himself and one of his followers, which is really good. It's a very, very funny book. And it's him at his most clear. It's him minus whatever psychotic rages or drug-induced fantasies he was going through. He's very clear in that book. And so I had, when I was learning the tarot, one of the interpretations I got was his. And I remember that there is a card called the Aeon, and it's represented by Horus. And there is an interesting link here that I can't find any reference to Jung making. So to the people who follow Crowley, and they're called, it's called Thelema, and they are Thelemites. They believe that we go through different ages, that we went through the Aeon of Isis and we were into goddess worship. Then we moved into the Aeon of Osiris and we worshipped a singular masculine father god. And that now we're moving into an Aeon of Horus. And here's the interesting thing that links back to Jung. I can't see Jung referring to this, but if you are more familiar with Jung than I am and you have the link, please post it in the comments below and I'll pin it so that other people can see. The modern Aeon of Horus, I'm reading now from the Crowley literature, is portrayed as a time of self-realization as well as a growing interest in all things spiritual. Crowley wrote, "The crowned and conquering child who dieth not, nor is reborn, but goeth radiant ever upon his way, even so goeth the sun. For as it is now known that night is but the shadow of the earth, so death is but the shadow of the body that veileth his light from its bearer." That's a reading from Heart of the Master. And there's another clip here from his other book, Little Essays Toward Truth. The book I recommended is called Magic Without Tears. Magic spelled with a K. It's not essential reading. It's just if you're interested in that kind of, it's funny. If you want to learn who Crowley is beyond the polemics and his critics from his own words, with him not sounding like a total lunatic, which he often does, Magic Without Tears is a, and you can dip in and out because it's a conversation. It's just a series of diary entries and letters. The Aeon, this is Crowley, the Aeon of Horus is here, and its flower may well be this, that freed of the obsession of the doom of the ego in death, and of the limitation of the mind by reason, the best men again set out with eager eyes upon the path of the wise, the mountain track of the goat, and then the untrodden ridge that leads to the ice-gleaming pinnacles of mastery. So they really, in the Thelemites and Crowley, really see Horus as a young god, and that's focused on that he is a child god. He dieth not, nor is reborn, but goeth radiant ever upon his way. He is young, novel vision, eternally. Well, where does that reflect in Jungian psychology? The idea forgive my Latin, the puer eternus. Puer means boy, eternus means eternal. So the eternal boy, or Peter Pan syndrome. You'll often hear Jordan Peterson talking about this. Horus represents that. Horus represents the eternal boy. If you look at where Crowley has it in his deck of tarot, the Aeon, the moment of the age, the spirit of time, the spirit of the age itself, it's got this eternal boyishness to it, this eternal childishness to it. So, you know, you've got people like Jordan Peterson and other people within that sphere, and I've said it as well, and I've included myself in this. Like, I have Peter Pan syndrome, and I can see a culture that's stuck in its cultural adolescence. It doesn't want to grow up, really doesn't, which is the appeal of people like Jordan Peterson. They're saying, we have to grow up. Why are we stuck in this? It could be because we're reflecting the spirit of the age in a certain sense, which is this age of Horus. It's young, it's impetuous, it's visionary, it's very spiritual. And if that spirituality is not grounded in a sort of an earthy, more of a structured Osirian, is that an adjective? Osiris-like, it would be represented by the Hierophant in the tarot, which would be a structure and tradition. It's the discipline of tradition, the Hierophant, and possibly the Hermit as well. And you would have the feminine version of that, which would be Isis. It would be earthy, it would be practical, it would be Mother Ayahuasca, and it would be represented by the Empress and the High Priestess, and probably the Queen of Discs as well, as a means of integrating it. Well, if you're spiritual without tradition and structure and earthy practicality, what are you? You're a knob. You're the person that JP is of ultra spiritual has been mocking and satirizing so wonderfully for years, because you're not grounded in anything. It's all just a flex. It all becomes superficial virtue signaling if it's not grounded in tradition and not in it's masculine. People get offended when I start talking about men and women. It's archetypally masculine, and practicality and earthiness and matters of the material, mater, is feminine. Oh, so you're saying men can't be practical and women can't? No, calm down. This is the way it is defined archetypally. It's more to do with yin and yang, these energies. Of course, it's not men are this and women are that. So I couldn't see Jung relate the issue of the puer eternus to Horus. So just a couple of quotes from Jung on the puer eternus. The positive side of the puer appears as the divine child who symbolizes newness, potential for growth, hope for the future, Star Wars, A New Hope. He also foreshadows the hero that he sometimes becomes. The negative side is the child man who refuses to grow up and meet challenges of life face on. Sounds familiar. Waiting instead for his ship to come in and solve all his problems. This is now a direct quote from Jung. For the time being, one is doing this or that. It is not yet what is really wanted. And there's always the fantasy that sometime in the future, the real thing will come about. The one thing dreaded throughout by such a type of man is to be bound to anything, whatever. I just listened to a Douglas Murray interview this morning. I think it's the last broadly broadcasted interview he did. It's about 2 weeks ago with someone in Latin America. They never said where. And he rounds out this interview. He's got a bit of a sad tone. It's kind of melancholy about the state of the world and where things are up to now. And he gets deep. He starts talking about a sermon delivered by C.S. Lewis at Oxford, which I think is where Douglas went to, in 1939. And he says, you know, the essential message is these times are not perfect. These are bad times, but the times are never perfect.
If we as human beings had put off the search for beauty and meaning and purpose until the conditions were optimal, then the thing would never have got started.
Exactly.
Quote from Jung, and then I'll hand back over to Professor Peterson. Common symptoms of puer psychology are dreams of an imprisonment and similar imagery. Chains, bars, cages, entrapment, bondage, life itself is experienced as a prison. Well, Douglas Murray in that same interview, I've never heard him say this before, says that we are infected with an ideology at the moment which sees the times that we're living through, everything is a form of emancipation. We're emancipated from colonialism, we're emancipated from slavery, we're emancipated from institutions, we're emancipated from religion. But if you tie this, if you go through a circuitous route from Douglas Murray to C.S. Lewis, back to Aleister Crowley, down and through to Jung and to the ancient Egyptians, you can see how the time that we're living through could be in the same way that we can have a negatively aspected anima or animus, or a positively aspected anima or animus, negative yin, negative yang, positive yang. We could be living through a time of
Horus.
True, but it's negatively aspected. The tarot card is reversed, it's upside down. And we've got these fantasies. And as Jung writes, it's common symptoms of puer psychology, puer meaning boy, of man-child psychology are dreams of an imprisonment and similar imagery. Chains, bars, cages, entrapment, bondage. Life itself is experienced as a prison. Dreams of oppression, dreams of imprisonment, where, not to say there's no oppression in the world, my God, nobody's saying that, but this obsession with it in very wealthy countries, in the wealthiest, freest countries in the world, totally obsessed with their oppression and imprisonment. So I thought that was interesting. I thought that I'd reflect that back, drop a few names, did some good name dropping. I did some name bombing. It was a name drop blitz, that. I hope that was useful. I highly recommend Beyond Order. As I say, I'm only halfway through, but I've gotten a lot from it so far already. And you don't need to get it. You can go to Jordan Peterson's website. He's not selling it direct through the website, so you can just go to Amazon. I felt a bit guilty because I was like, maybe I'm just recommending feeding the billionaire reptile archons if we do that. But yes, you can just go ahead and do that. I guess the only thing would be to say, if you do that, then please do leave a review. And so here now is a lecture from 2016 from Professor Peterson talking about the Horus Osiris myth. Ladies and gents, thank you for your time and your attention, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon. Cheers.
So Horus takes his eye and he goes back to the underworld. So he does this voluntarily. He goes back to the underworld. And he goes back to where Osiris is existing, because it's sort of the land of the dead. And so Osiris has this weird existence. He's scattered all over Egypt, but his essence, I suppose, his spirit, is down there in the underworld, which is, it's not exactly hell. Hell is a suburb of the underworld. Like, it's the worst neighborhood of the underworld. That's a good way of thinking about it. You guys go to the underworld fairly often. You may take a rare side trip to hell, and you probably regret it. But, and we can talk about what that means, because it actually has a very specific meaning. Anyways, Osiris isn't in hell. He's just in the underworld. So he's sitting there sort of, you know, inactive and in rough shape. So Horus goes down to the underworld, and he finds Osiris, and he gives him an eye. And so then Osiris can see again. Remember, he couldn't see. He was willfully blind, right? And so that's partly what led to his demise. So Horus gives him this eye that's been hard fought, right? It's the eye with which he encountered evil. He gives Osiris that eye. It perks him right up. And so then Horus and Osiris go back to the surface world, and they unite to form the ruler of Egypt. And so the idea is that the proper ruler is obviously the thing that can pay attention and conquer the pathology of the state and willful blindness, but it's more than that. It's the thing that does that and then rejuvenates the state. And you know, one of the things, I think this is quite interesting. So, the hippie culture in the 1960s was a revolutionary culture, and you can make a case that during the 60s and the latter part of the 50s, that young people's attention was very much focused on certain pathological elements of the state. You know, The civil rights movement seemed to be a real thing. There was a movement towards the emancipation of women. There were lots of things that I think you can look at from a distance and say, you know, good work. But then there was the other element of it, which was, well, you know, down with the state and don't trust anyone over 30. Well, that's kind of stupid because, first of all, you know, it's not that long till you're 30, and then what do you do? And second, it's like, well, no, you can't throw the damn baby out with the bathwater. I mean, first of all, you're probably doing that because you don't want to grow up ever. You're just Peter Pan. And second, it's like, you can't leave Osiris languishing in the underworld. You have to give him vision and bring him back up to the surface, because I don't care how attentive you are. If you're also not wise, you're not going to be good for anything. And the wisdom is partly the integration of the best your culture has to offer you into your character, so that you can be an avatar of culture, an attentive avatar of culture. And then you're a well-balanced soul. Well, so the Egyptians figured all this out. And then it's even cooler than that, because they used this idea of the union of Horus and Osiris as their conceptual representation of what gave the pharaoh sovereignty. Which is because, again, like the Mesopotamians, they were trying to figure out, well, what should rule? You know, what should be above all? And the Mesopotamians figured, well, it's something like Marduk. He's got lots of eyes, he can talk, he's brave, he'll conquer the unknown, he makes things as a consequence. He makes a pretty good top god. And the Egyptians added a level of sophistication to that, because Horus is not only the thing that will go into the underworld. He goes into the underworld and he rescues things of tremendous value and then unites with them, so that not only can he see, but he's wise. And so then that's what the pharaoh was supposed to be. And the Egyptians basically characterized that union as something akin to the immortal soul. Now, Iliad tracks this development he called the democratization of Osiris. So first of all, basically only the pharaoh was allowed to be the Horus-Osiris union in some sense, you know. So, and in a way, he was God on earth, you know, and which is a conception, of course, that's lasted into cultures for a very, very long period of time. The Japanese still thought that way about their emperor until the end of World War II, and many of them still think that way. So he was the embodiment of divine sovereignty. It was in the leader only. But as the Egyptian state developed, the idea that that soul was an attribute started to descend down the power hierarchy. So after a while, the aristocracy started to use it. And then, now, and this is a radical oversimplification, but it'll do for the purposes of this discussion. You know, by the time the Jews came along, and they came out of Egypt, mythologically speaking, the idea that there could be a union or a relationship between something that was divine and something that was individual was distributed a long ways down the power hierarchy. You know, and then by the time the Greeks showed up, well, in some sense it was all males, at least all males who were part of the polity. And then when the Christians emerged, it was everyone. Prostitutes, tax collectors, thieves, murderers, everyone. And so the idea of sovereignty started to become, you know, first of all, it was a mythological attribute. It was identified with the ruler. But then it became a psychological attribute that was distributed across the entire population. It's brilliant. It's brilliant. And as far as I can tell, that's really, those conceptualizations form the substructure of our belief that each person is divinely valuable, you know, in their own right, that they have inalienable rights, even if you're a murderer, right? The state is very restricted in what it can do to you, even if you've committed a terrible crime, even if you admit to it. The state is still very restricted in what it's allowed to do to you, because there's an idea that there's something about you that has the quality of transcendent value. That's exactly it. And, well, and we know some of the attributes, you know. One of them is that you can see and pay attention. The other is that you can speak and communicate. You know, the other is that you can become wise, that you can approach things that frighten you with courage and generate new information as a consequence. Like, there's lots of things about you that the relationship between chaos and order actually literally depend upon. And so the state has come to respect the individual, partly because the individual is by necessity the thing that rejuvenates the state. And so there's this dynamic relationship between the two. The state structures you, but it's old and blind, and there's lots of things it can't see, and it's partly